Dawn over Germany, February 1944. Contrails webbed the sky. Veteran Luftwaffe eyes misread the scale. In 6 days, the Allies flew nearly 4,000 heavy bomber sorties, dropped over 20 million pounds of bombs, and, crucially, escorted them all the way in with long-range fighters. The cost to Germany in that single big week was severe. About a third of its available fighter aircraft and a fifth of its veteran fighter pilots gone. By early 1944, the United States was producing aircraft at a pace the Luftwaffe could neither match nor counter. Wartime output had vaulted from fewer than 3,000 military planes in 1939 to more than 85,000 in 1943, and 1944 would surpass even that record as the arsenal of democracy hit its stride. German pilots who rose to meet the bomber streams found not only massed flying fortresses and liberators, but swarms of P-47s and P-51s waiting above and behind. After the week's fighting, American leaders judged that the offensive use of escorts had broken the back of Germany's air defense. Even sober Luftwaffe analyses would later concede they were being overwhelmed. So the question, echoing from briefing rooms to dispersal huts, became brutally simple. How do you fight an air war when your enemy can field more machines than you can train men to fly? The answer lay in records and receipts. U.S. factory schedules, shipping tables and training quotas created a pipeline of machines and aircrew the Reich could not replace. Big Week's ledger told the story with cold finality. Hundreds of Allied aircraft lost, and thousands of airmen casualties. Yet the Luftwaffe's core was being hollowed faster than Germany could rebuild. According to Air University and the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force, Operation Argument, Big Week, marked the beginning of the end for Germany's fighter arm. The archival ledger closes the scene: industry versus scarcity, and the factory won. In 1940, the Luftwaffe stood as the most feared air force on Earth. Within a single year, its Stuka dive bombers and Messerschmitt Bf-109s had carved a trail of conquest across Europe, from Warsaw to Paris, annihilating resistance with surgical precision. By the time France surrendered, the German Air Force possessed over 5,000 operational combat aircraft, and its pilots were the most experienced in the world, many with hundreds of sorties behind them. The British Air Ministry admitted in post-war assessments that the Luftwaffe's early dominance stemmed from its unified doctrine, veteran personnel, and aggressive tactical leadership. At the heart of that confidence stood men like General Adolf Galland, who boasted that his fighter wings controlled the air whenever we chose to. Hermann Göring, once a World War I ace, fed the myth relentlessly, proclaiming that no enemy bomber will ever reach the Ruhr. Early victories confirmed their arrogance. From the lightning strike on Poland in 1939 to the fall of France in 1940, the Luftwaffe appeared invincible. Its twin-engine Bf-110s swept the skies clear of opposition, and the Junkers Ju-87 Stuka screamed over battlefields, its siren a symbol of Nazi terror. Yet even as triumph filled German propaganda reels, strategic blindness crept in. The Luftwaffe had been built for tactical air support, not for a prolonged strategic air campaign. Its command believed future wars would be decided by rapid ground victories, not industrial endurance. Göring dismissed warnings about America's vast production base, calling the US a nation of mechanics, not warriors. The Reich Ministry of Aviation recorded internal memos in 1941 dismissing reports from military attachés in Washington that American factories could produce over 50,000 aircraft per year. This overconfidence hardened into delusion. When Hitler ordered the invasion of the Soviet Union, the Luftwaffe expected another short campaign. Instead, it was bled across 1,000 miles of front. Galland later admitted that by 1943 our force had lost the flexibility and the faith that had built it. The illusion of air superiority collapsed the moment it was challenged by numbers and by industry. Luftwaffe had mistaken skill for sustainability. As declassified German Air Ministry memoranda later revealed, the seeds of its downfall had already been sown, not in the skies, but in the factories it had chosen to underestimate. When the United States entered the war in December 1941, it possessed fewer than 2,500 first-line combat aircraft and just a few thousand trained pilots. Yet within 2 years, those figures would swell to industrial proportions unmatched in military history. Under the command of General Henry H. Hap Arnold, the U.S. Army Air Forces orchestrated a logistical miracle. The Army Air Forces Statistical Digest records that by 1943, American factories were producing 85,098 aircraft annually, nearly 7,000 per month, a tempo no Axis nation could approach. By 1944, that number reached an astonishing 96,000 planes, including bombers, fighters, and transports. This industrial surge came from a home front, mobilized like a single organism. Companies such as Boeing, North American, and Republic operated around the clock, while the Ford Motor Company's Willow Run plant rolled a complete B-24 Liberator off its line every 63 minutes. Every component, rivets, engines, instruments, was standardized to fit across models, enabling repairs and production at unprecedented speed. According to War Production Board reports, American industry built more aircraft in 1944 alone than Germany did from 1939 to 1945 combined. Parallel to the manufacturing miracle was the creation of the world's most sophisticated pilot training pipeline. The U.S. Army Air Forces Training Command established 22 advanced flying schools across the country, churning out an average of 10,000 new pilots every month by 1943. Trainee programs progressed from primary trainers like the PT-17 Stearman to advanced fighters and bombers, ensuring a steady flow of well-prepared air crews. Unlike their German counterparts, whose training hours dropped from 240 in 1940 to barely 110 by 1944, American pilots graduated with full operational readiness and rotated home after each combat tour to train new replacements. The result was a system built for longevity, not heroics. Where the Luftwaffe relied on elite veterans fighting until death, the U.S. relied on process, factories, schedules, and standardization. In the words of General Arnold himself, our strength is not in any single pilot or plane, but in the continuous, unstoppable replacement of both. That machine, fed by industry and discipline, ensured America would never again be outnumbered in the skies. In the winter skies of 1943, German pilots still believed they could contain the American air offensive. The Reichsfighter Command calculated that with swift interception and concentrated fire, its Jagdgeschwader could tear apart incoming bomber streams before they reached vital targets. Yet when the first long-range P-51 Mustangs appeared over Germany, everything changed. We thought they could never follow the bombers that far, recalled Luftwaffe ace Johannes Steinhoff in his memoir Messerscharf. Then they were suddenly everywhere, above, beside, and behind. Before the P-51's arrival, American bombers like the B-17 Flying Fortress and B-24 Liberator suffered appalling losses on unescorted raids deep into Germany. The infamous October 1943 Schweinfurt-Regensburg mission cost 60 bombers and over 600 airmen in a single day. Those losses led U.S. planners to push for an escort fighter with both range and speed. When the Merlin engine P-51 entered service in late 1943, escorted by drop tanks that extended its reach to Berlin and beyond, the Luftwaffe faced a threat it had never imagined: hundreds of fighters flying alongside bombers every mile of the way. German radar stations began to report formations they struggled to believe: 800-plus bombers escorted by 600 or more fighters. In a Luftwaffe situation report dated February 21, 1944, a staff officer noted that enemy fighter presence has doubled in the space of weeks. Intercepts captured by Allied intelligence confirmed the disbelief, pilots describing endless swarms of P-51s appearing where none were expected. Even veteran commanders like Adolf Galland conceded later that the Mustang turned daylight operations from victory into suicide. Eyewitness accounts from both sides paint the same picture. German ground crews stared upward in shock as formations darkened the sun. American bomber crews, once accustomed to watching their comrades vanish in fireballs, began to see German attacks falter, their momentum broken by disciplined fighter escorts diving from above. For the first time, remembered a B-17 navigator in the 100th Bomb Group, we felt the odds tilt our way. The shock was psychological as much as tactical. Luftwaffe fighter wings, stretched thin by constant deployment and fuel shortages, faced fresh, well-trained Americans who rotated regularly from home bases. The Germans could not comprehend the scale of the Allied replacement system that sent new pilots and machines as fast as they were lost. By the end of Big Week in February 1944, Luftwaffe officers knew the truth. What had begun as surprise had become inevitability. The Americans weren't merely coming, they were arriving faster than Germany could take off. By early 1944, the air war over Europe had become a campaign of relentless escalation. The 8th Air Force, operating from English bases, and the 15th Air Force, striking from Italy, launched near-daily raids that stretched German defences to breaking point. Between January and May, Allied operations averaged more than 2,000 sorties per day, a rhythm that no German wing could match. Luftwaffe situation maps from the period show units redeployed again and again. Jagdgeschwader 26 pulled from France to defend Berlin one week, then rushed south to protect oil fields the next. The pace destroyed cohesion long before a shot was fired. German strength reports paint a grim pattern. At the start of 1944, roughly 2,200 single-engine fighters were operational across all fronts. By June, that figure had fallen below 1,300, with pilot strength cut by nearly half. Fuel shortages compounded the crisis. Training flights were slashed to a few hours per month, and even experienced squadrons were ordered to conserve every litre of aviation fuel. American reconnaissance confirmed the paralysis. Airfields crowded with grounded aircraft that could not fly for lack of gasoline. While German commanders fought to plug gaps, Allied precision improved with every week. The introduction of long-range radar navigation and the coordination of escort groups allowed bomber formations to maintain tighter routes and timing. U.S. losses, once catastrophic, dropped by nearly 40% after the Mustang entered full service. Yet for the Luftwaffe, attrition accelerated. Replacement pilots arrived with barely 100 flight hours, facing opponents with triple that experience. A February 1944 report from Jagdfliegerführer Mitte lamented that our young men last 2 or 3 missions at most. Intercepted radio chatter captured the despair. Too many. They are everywhere, one pilot gasped before disappearing from radar near Magdeburg. Such fragments tell the story better than numbers. A force exhausted, outproduced, and increasingly out of time, according to US and German archives alike. The spring of 1944 marked the moment when the balance of air power shifted irreversibly. American skies stretched across Europe, while German airfields filled with empty cockpits. What had begun as a contest of tactics had become a war of mathematics, and Germany's arithmetic no longer added up. The decisive proof of Allied air dominance came in Operation Argument, better known as Big Week, from February 20-25. 1944. Conceived by General Karl Spaatz and executed by Generals Jimmy Doolittle and Ira Eaker, the operation sought to cripple the German aircraft industry by bombing factories at Regensburg, Leipzig, Gotha and Brunswick. Over 3,300 heavy bombers and nearly 900 escort fighters participated, an armada unmatched in scale. For the Luftwaffe, it was the ultimate test: defend the skies over the Reich or watch its war industry burn. From dawn on February 20th, radar screens across northern Germany lit up with what controllers called massive enemy streams. Luftwaffe command scrambled every available Jagdgeschwader. JG-11, JG-26, JG-300, and JG-1 threw themselves into the fight, climbing through contrails into a maelstrom of B-17 formations, protected by swarms of P-47 Thunderbolts and the newly arrived P-51 Mustangs. Combat reports from JG-26 note continuous engagements lasting hours, with pilots forced to land, refuel, and rejoin in the same day, an exhausting cycle repeated until ammunition or fuel ran out. The numbers tell the story. During the week, Germany lost 355 fighters and over 100 experienced pilots, a blow from which its defense system never recovered. US losses were heavy, 244 bombers and 33 fighters destroyed, but they were replaceable within days. "We can build 100 more before they bury their dead," one 8th Air Force officer remarked grimly in his diary. German factories, by contrast, were already suffering from chronic shortages of aluminum, ball bearings and fuel. Allied bombs destroyed the Messerschmitt assembly plant at Regensburg and damaged the Focke-Wulf facility at Gotha. Even more catastrophic was the loss of experience. German ace Walter Dahl later recalled that our best men fell in that week, while training schools had been stripped bare to fill frontline gaps. Surviving pilots returned to bases to find new recruits barely able to taxi. The Luftwaffe's command structure acknowledged the crisis in a secret report dated March 3, 1944, warning that the continued rate of loss will lead to total collapse within months. Big Week was not merely a battle of airplanes, it was the collision of two industrial philosophies. German precision and skill met American scale and continuity. The Allies could absorb punishment. Germany could not. By late spring, Doolittle's new doctrine allowed escorts to abandon bombers temporarily and hunt the Luftwaffe wherever it formed, accelerating its annihilation. By June 1944, when Allied bombers supported the Normandy invasion, the Luftwaffe fielded fewer than 300 operational fighters in France. The rest lay wrecked or grounded across the Reich. Big Week had begun as a strategic gamble. It ended as a mathematical certainty, the moment Germany lost control of its own sky. By the summer of 1944, the Luftwaffe was a shadow of its former self. The airfields, once bristling with sleek Messerschmitts, now stood littered with burned-out hulks and empty hangars. The collapse was not sudden, but cumulative, 1,000 small cuts delivered by relentless attrition. German Air Ministry reports for July record only 1,090 operational single-engine fighters left on all fronts, a mere fraction of the 3,000 available a year earlier. More devastating still was the loss of men. In the first half of 1944 alone, the Luftwaffe lost over 17,000 aircrew, most of them irreplaceable veterans. Inside command headquarters, despair crept into official correspondence. A memorandum from General Günther Korten, dated July 22, 1944, warned that fighter replacements cannot keep pace with losses and that inexperienced pilots are entering battle after less than 60 hours of flight. This was no exaggeration. Training programs had been gutted by fuel shortages so severe that instructors could only demonstrate procedures on the ground. German aviation historian Cassius Becker later noted that new pilots often first experienced combat while being attacked. Captured enemy communications from Jagdgeschwader 27 reveal the same hopelessness. "We have no chance. The sky is filled with them," one pilot radioed moments before disappearing from radar. Allied intelligence units transcribing the message underlined the tone: utter fatigue, loss of will. On the ground, airfield personnel were ordered to camouflage surviving aircraft with branches and netting to avoid destruction during takeoff. Morale plummeted. Pilots rotated so frequently between defense zones that camaraderie disintegrated. Veteran commanders like Adolf Galland clashed with Göring, accusing him of incompetence and delusion. Galland's private diary, later recovered by Allied investigators, records a moment of brutal clarity. "We are sacrificing our last youth to statistics we no longer believe." By autumn, Germany's air defense existed largely on paper. Jet fighters like the Me-262 promised salvation, but arrived too late and in too few numbers to matter. Every engagement now resembled a rout, each sortie another entry in a ledger of exhaustion. The Luftwaffe's collapse was more than military, it was existential. The organization that once epitomized Nazi power now represented its futility. As one captured German colonel confessed in 1945, "We didn't lose to men, we lost to factories." By late 1944, the skies over Europe belonged entirely to the Allies. What began as a duel for air superiority had evolved into an open highway for American and British bombers. German industry, once the engine of conquest, became the battlefield itself. With the Luftwaffe crippled, the Allies shifted from selective strikes to systemic annihilation. In August 1944, the U.S. 8th Air Force launched raids that destroyed 95% of synthetic oil production at Leuna and Politz. Without fuel, tanks, aircraft, and even training programs ground to a halt. The enemy's strength now lies not in battle, but in endurance, read a British Air Staff memorandum that autumn, and endurance is failing. The results were immediate and catastrophic. Allied reconnaissance films show cities like Hamburg, Kassel and Munich reduced to skeletal ruins, rail networks severed, and refineries left smouldering. Between June and December 1944, Germany's aircraft output fell by nearly 40%, despite desperate attempts to disperse production underground. At the same time, the Normandy landings, shielded by overwhelming Allied air cover, demonstrated the strategic transformation. Luftwaffe intervention over the beaches was negligible. Out of thousands of sorties, fewer than 100 German fighters reached the invasion zone. American historian Richard Overy would later write, "The German soldier no longer looked to the sky for help, only for destruction." Allied command understood the magnitude of what air dominance had achieved. General Dwight D. Eisenhower credited the bomber offensive with making D-Day possible, remarking that if I didn't have air supremacy, I wouldn't be here. By early 1945, Allied bombers operated in daylight with near impunity, striking Berlin itself while long-range Mustangs strafed German airfields, locomotives and convoys at will. Inside Germany, morale collapsed under the unending roar of engines overhead. Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels privately admitted in his diaries that the people have lost all faith in our defences. The once mighty Luftwaffe had become a ghost, visible in name only, powerless to defend the nation it was built to protect. In strategic terms, the collapse of German air power sealed the Reich's fate months before its armies surrendered. Air superiority had done what no army could alone. It choked the life from an industrial empire. The skies, once symbols of Nazi ambition, now carried only its ashes. The downfall of the Luftwaffe remains one of the most profound lessons in the history of warfare. That industrial capacity and training infrastructure can outweigh even the greatest tactical brilliance. Between 1939 and 1945, Germany produced roughly 119,000 aircraft, while the United States built over 324,000. According to the U.S. War Production Board, the disparity extended beyond machines. It was systemic. American factories, schools, and logistics operated as a single synchronized organism, while Germany's production was fragmented, hampered by political interference, and starved of fuel and manpower. Historians have long debated whether the Luftwaffe could have survived had its strategy shifted earlier. Post-war analyses by the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey concluded that no tactical or technical adaptation could compensate for the numerical inferiority imposed by Allied industry. The Luftwaffe's focus on elite units, its resistance to pilot rotation, and its rigid central command ensured that experience vanished with every casualty. In contrast, the U.S. model, where veterans became instructors, created a self-sustaining cycle of growth. The implications reached far beyond 1945. American air doctrine after the war, codified by the newly independent U.S. Air Force in 1947, institutionalized these lessons: flexible training, decentralized command, and mass industrial readiness. The concept of air superiority as prerequisite became the foundation of modern strategy, from Korea to the Gulf War. The very blueprint that defeated Germany became America's enduring military advantage. For Germany, the legacy was one of tragic irony. Its early dominance had inspired the world's first theories of air warfare, yet its downfall illustrated the fatal flaw of romantic heroism. The cult of the individual ace, men like Erich Hartmann and Günter Roll, who achieved hundreds of kills, masked a system incapable of sustaining itself. When those pilots were shot down or captured, there were no replacements. In academic circles, the air war over Europe is now cited as a turning point in the evolution of total war. It demonstrated that battles could be decided not only by bravery or tactics, but by logistics, production and education. The industrial base, America's vast network of factories, oil fields, and training centers, proved as decisive as any weapon. As the historian Alan Stevens wrote, the Luftwaffe did not merely lose control of the sky, it lost control of time, America's capacity to outproduce, outtrain, and outlast defined a new era, one where wars would be won not just in combat, but in classrooms, factories, and planning boards long before the first shot was fired. By the spring of 1945, the once mighty Luftwaffe had ceased to exist as an effective fighting force. The statistics told a story that no propaganda could conceal. American factories had built 13 aircraft for every one Germany produced, and the United States had trained nearly 10 times as many pilots. In the skies above a ruined Reich, Allied bombers roamed almost unopposed. When a final, desperate German squadron lifted off to challenge them, it was less a battle than an elegy. The shock that German pilots once expressed, "They have more planes than we have men," was not exaggeration, but a mathematical truth. What had begun as a contest of courage ended as proof of organization, discipline, and industrial democracy. The men who flew America's bombers and fighters were not aristocratic knights of the air. They were mechanics, engineers, and farm boys who learned that victory depended on systems, not myths. From the ashes of that war emerged the enduring principle of modern air power, that superiority is sustained, not achieved. Every aircraft in the air depends on a web of workers, planners, and factories on the ground. The US military absorbed this lesson deeply, ensuring that future wars would never begin with empty hangars or untrained crews. For Germany, the collapse of its air arm stands as both tragedy and warning, a testament to the limits of valor without preparation. For America, it remains a story of how innovation and industry can triumph even against a once invincible enemy. As historians continue to sift through the wreckage of those years, the message endures for every generation that studies it. Nations that master logistics master destiny. If this story of production, perseverance, and human ingenuity captured your attention, explore the archives that preserve it, the diaries of pilots, the records of factories, and the museums that keep their legacy alive. And remember, behind every victory in the sky lies an army of minds and hands on the ground.